sandwiches for breakfast and logs for lunch, pal.
Oh, well, we are checking out disturbing Uber stories. This is about to go down, son. No, the guy played this music. I don't like this kind of music.
What you're about to hear was the worst night of my life. I went out to a downtown club with my boyfriend and his friends on a Saturday night. My boyfriend and I hadn't been getting along for a while, and at some point in the club, we had an argument. I didn't want to be there anymore, so I went outside and called an Uber to pick me up. It was raining that night, so I waited under the awning of a building nearby to the club. A white car pulled up in front of me and stopped. I walked over, and the woman driving rolled down the window. She said, "Uber?" And I said, "Yeah," and then her name. She said, "Yes." So I got in the back seat. I asked, "How are you?" And I'm pretty sure she didn't answer. When I didn't hear a response to my question, I shot a glance up from my phone for a second. The woman had both hands firmly planted on the steering wheel. She was driving in a very stiff, upright position. She also had very curly hair and a somewhat darker skin complexion. She was driving down the street I usually took to get home, only she was going the opposite way. I didn't want to speak up and correct her just yet, because maybe she was taking a different route. The further we went away from my house, though, the more concerned and frustrated I got. Finally, I spoke up and told her she was going the wrong way. She said in a horrible, thick accent, something about how she was going to the highway instead. I knew for a fact the highway wasn't the quicker route, though. Then, my phone vibrated, and I looked down to see the notification from Uber. It said on my screen, "Meet Uber driver now." I opened up the app, and it said my Uber had just arrived at the point I was originally standing at, and that the car I was supposed to get in was a black Nissan. At this point, I started saying in a louder voice to the driver that she wasn't my Uber. I asked her to pull over and let me out, and when she didn't seem to acknowledge me, I started to actually yell and push at her seat. Even though the car was moving, I even tried opening the door, but the child lock was apparently on. After a little more yelling, she finally looked at me through the mirror, then pulled off to the side. The door clicked unlocked, and I got out of the car and walked away from it. My actual Uber driver was calling me, and I picked up, apologizing, asking him to come to my current location. He said he'd be right over, and 5 minutes later, the car pulled up. When I got in the car, I explained everything to him. He stopped the car, looked at me, and told me I just escaped a sex trafficking trap. There had been reports of multiple fake Ubers going around trying to trick unsuspecting victims into getting into the car to lure them to unknown locations. It was apparently part of a sex trafficking ring, and the drivers were usually female to appear less intimidating to the female victims. I just want to stress to everyone to make sure the car you're getting into is actually your Uber.
Nobody want to be a part of those. It's like leading you straight into the hallway of Jared Fogo.
One night when I was decently drunk after leaving a bar,
It's like
I
above the
started
door says
messaging people
Jared
on
Fogo
Tinder.
in
Some
black.
girl named Alicia had messaged me, so I messaged her back. She answered almost immediately, asking what I was doing that night. I said I was
Taking a
just
dump.
leaving a bar looking for someone to hang out with. She wrote back, "You should come over and smoke."
Smoke? No.
I said, "Yeah, send me your address."
No.
She sent back her address promptly. It seemed like the quickest, easiest, most ideal Tinder match a guy could ask for on a Saturday night. I called for an Uber to drop me off at that address. The driver pulled up in his Honda, and I got in the front seat. Usually I would get in the back seat, but I was decently drunk and feeling extra social. The driver seemed cool. I was honest with him about where I was going, telling him I was about to meet a girl from Tinder. He laughed and said nice, and started going on about his stories meeting girls as an Uber driver and such. On the way there, I asked Alicia for her number, and she gave it to me. I started texting her, and she gave normal answers. When we got to the house, the driver said the house seemed familiar to him. Had to admit it did look a little sketchy since there were no cars in the driveway and the lights were off. He told me to be careful. I thanked him and said goodbye, and he drove away down the block and stopped near the end, I'm guessing setting up his next ride. I walked up to the house and tried to ring the bell, but I didn't hear a bell from the inside, so I knocked on the door. Then I tried calling Alicia. It went to voicemail after one ring, but she texted me right after saying it's open, come inside. Then there was a knock at the window, which almost gave me a heart attack. I looked at the window, and even though there were no lights on inside, I saw the blind was slightly lifted, and someone was waving their hand on the other side of the window. Before I tried the door, a number not saved on my phone started calling me. I assumed it was Alicia, so I picked up. But instead of hearing the voice of a girl, I heard the familiar voice of my Uber driver. He ordered me in a very concerned voice to walk away from the house right now. I then saw the Uber driver's car pull back up in front of the house. He told me to get back in the car. I hung up the phone and listened to him. As soon as I got in the car, he drove away from the house and told me that the house was vacant. In just the previous month, someone had been lured into that house, robbed, and murdered. It was a story that likely could have been similar to my own had I stepped into that house. It was a lot for me to take in, but I thanked that Uber driver the best I could, and even took his number because he was so cool and I couldn't appreciate him enough. The next morning when I was sober, this was even more disturbing to think about. It was a Monday night, a slower night for an Uber driver,
that's what happens when
especially
you
in our
think
bum-ass
that,
town.
you know,
So when a trip request popped up on my
house.
screen, I jumped on it. I was picking up a guy named John. I drove across the neighborhood to a corner liquor store that was closed at this hour. There were two young guys waiting on the corner, and when I pulled up to the curb, they got in the car. I confirmed John's name to make sure he was who I was picking up. Then I started heading to their destination. The two whispered to each other, and it was a little odd. I looked at the rearview mirror every once in a while, and every time I did, they would both notice and look back at me. I kept trying not to look, but I found myself accidentally doing it over and over. I asked them where they were headed. Neither of them answered. I figured they didn't hear me because the back window was open and there was wind noise. So I asked again. This time one of them yelled Harris Avenue. It didn't answer the main point of my question, which was to be polite and make small talk, but it did let me know these two were not exactly people I wanted in my car. I felt my big toe press a bit harder on the gas instinctively, just knowing I wanted to get there sooner. We got to the street, but the apparent address they wanted me to pull up to was some rundown storefront with a group of guys in front.
It's holding up fine.
I slowed down and asked if this was it. I turned around to face them and saw they were both wearing masks now, similar to the masks from the movie The Purge. I felt something press up against the back of my shoulder. I assumed it was a gun.
I'm warm.
They told me pull up to where the guys were outside. I did so, and three big guys also wearing masks came up to my window, demanding my wallet. I gave it to them without hesitation, and the two guys in the back seat got out. The five masked men all together walked away from my car, one of them kicking at my door while passing. I drove away and reported it to Uber, who said they'd get in contact with the authorities. It turned out the info used on that John person's account was all fake, and he was using a stolen credit card. I lost $250, my IDs, and countless cards in my wallet, but I'm just happy I escaped with my life. After leaving a friend's Super Bowl party, I called an Uber to drive me home. When I got in the Uber, there was a guy in a baseball hat sitting in the back seat. I didn't say anything to acknowledge it. I just said hi to the driver. I figured I must have called an Uber pool instead of just a regular Uber. I didn't care though. We got to my house, I got out of the car and shut the door. I heard a second door shut on the other side though. When the car drove away, I saw the guy who had been sitting next to me in the baseball hat, standing in the street, facing in my direction, but his head down so that his hat was covering his face. I said, "What's up? What's going on?" He started to walk away. Still, I knew something was going on. So instead of walking to my house, I started walking around the block. I saw the man on the opposite sidewalk across the street walking in my same direction. When there was an intersection in the street, I turned. When I saw he did the same thing, I ran. When I saw he started to run too, the adrenaline kicked in, and I sprinted faster than I'd ever ran in my life. I ran faster than him, and when I made it to my house, I ran to the backyard before he could possibly see where I went. Then I went into the house. I called the Uber driver at once, and he told me the guy next to me said he knew the next guy the Uber driver would be picking up, which ended up being me. The driver had his info, so he said he would report the guy. I don't know what happened because I never called or texted the Uber driver again. I also don't know why exactly that guy would be targeting people getting out of Ubers, but it definitely taught me to be more cautious with Uber rides.
Car breakdowns.